Hello and welcome back to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you all with us today on Thursday, November 19th. It's also a great pleasure to be joined today by two journalists who cover our neck of the woods down here in southern Vermont. Great to have back with us Cherise Madigan, who writes for the Chester Telegraph, an online publication based, as the name suggests, in Chester, Vermont. And Cherise, great to have you back on the program again. It's been far too long.
Thanks for having me.
We're also very pleased to be joined today for the first time, but I'm sure it's not going to be the last, by Emma Cotton, who is a writer for VT Digger and also for Report for America. She joins us today from the Rutland area, which is her main beat, and that's going to be good because we don't get enough coverage out of Rutland down here. So good to have you with us, Emma, and welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you both for making the time out of what I know are some busy schedules. A lot to cover, I think, in the wake of the election, and now sort of what we're seeing as a resurgence in the whole COVID-19 pandemic. And we'll perhaps drill down into some of that. But I thought just to get us started, Cherise, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the recent meeting at the Londonderry Select Board, which seemed to generate a few sparks there between some of the board members about some of the new restrictions that Governor Scott announced earlier this week that would limit household gatherings for Thanksgiving and have bars closing at 10 o'clock and a few other restrictions that I guess many people are feeling, really? Do we have to do this now after 8 months? But what are they talking about in Londonderry?
Yeah, so on Friday, Governor Scott announced the no multi-household gatherings directive. And at Monday's meeting, that came up in a conversation that I think really reflects conversations that are happening throughout the state right now in households and between towns and other organizations. And that's how to grapple with it. One select board member, Vincent Annunziata, did speak up against the directive and said that it's not the governor's place to be legislating into our households. So a debate sprung up from that. Of course, a few other select board members made the point that it's not the board's place as a town select board to be directing residents how to act during a pandemic. That falls to Emergency Management Director Kevin Beatty primarily, as well as the state directives that are coming down through him. So that was quite a long debate. Of course, Town Clerk Kelly Payala, who is also a state representative, chimed in defense of those that are following guidelines and the difficulty that comes with doing that. Of course, it's hard around the holidays. So that's a discussion that has kept going throughout the forum, and I don't expect to stop anytime soon because it is, of course, such an incredibly personal but also community-wide discussion with a lot of repercussions potentially. So,
yeah, one of the points that one of the board members, I believe, was Mr. Annunziata, was making was that the number of cases in the Londonderry area is very small, and we're a drop in the bucket, I believe, was the expression he used. But still, I suppose it's a drop in the bucket because folks there have been wearing masks and practicing social distancing and washing hands and all the other things we've been told to do to keep the infections as low as possible.
Yeah, and one aspect of that debate is also how widespread compliance is and how much visitors and businesses, including Airbnbs that are a little less stringently regulated or at least enforced, I should say, how they're acting and the potential risks associated with people from outside of the area coming here for a weekend, especially as ski season ramps up, because we do have the three ski mountains, Bromley, Stratton, and Magic here, and there is a lot of traffic in the wintertime. So I think a lot of people are wary of what that might bring. They're also wary of the economic impacts of that industry being backlogged or held up in any way. So there's it doesn't seem to be a very amenable resolution either way. And of course, I think that leads to a lot of conversations and a lot of varying viewpoints.
Emma, just to bring you into this conversation here, since Killington is one of those areas that will be struggling with this. But last week it seemed like there was an outbreak in one of the senior care facilities up in Rutland. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What's our story there?
Absolutely. The case count at Rutland Care and Rehabilitation Center has ramped up significantly in the last week. I think the numbers now are 26 residents and 13 staff members have tested positive. Unfortunately, 2 of those people have died as of Wednesday. And the facility is facing staffing shortages. They've gone back and forth about whether to try to pull in volunteers from the community to help with tasks like distributing meals and keeping patients who suffer from dementia, for example, company while other staff are busy. And then I think also because Genesis, which is the company that owns this facility, has other facilities nearby. It's a national company. They also have the option of bringing in staff from some of their other facilities. So I think it's, volunteers may be a bit wary of walking into a situation where the COVID caseload is so high. But that, it's something that we're continuing to watch pretty closely considering the numbers. I know in Rutland County, 57 people have tested positive in the last 2 weeks, which is fairly significant. And it sounds like most of those cases are coming from this facility.
Wow. The other thing, of course, we're all watching closely is how this is going to, this recent outbreak will impact schools and education. I know Dan French, the education secretary, has said that he really doesn't want to see schools go back to all remote learning following the Thanksgiving vacation. But and I've also been reading a lot about how schools aren't really that big of a transmitter of the virus. But do you get any sense that schools up in the Rutland area might be thinking about going back to remote, at least for the period between Thanksgiving and Christmas?
I haven't heard anything specific about that yet. I do know that a student tested positive at Northwest Primary School. So students were learning remotely after that was announced. I think that it's been a case-by-case basis on this point, and they've been reacting based on positive cases, if there are any. It doesn't seem like there are any plans to go fully remote yet. I think part of that is how complicated it becomes. I interviewed some teachers who were struggling with childcare for their students who were, their own children who were remote learning. I interviewed a teacher who was, teaching in person, and her own child was learning remotely. And she was, she was able to do that because her husband could stay home, but she knew of a lot of other teachers who were struggling with finding childcare. So it creates this sort of web of consequences, which I think is partly why Governor Scott is hesitant to shut schools down and putting more of the focus on households to stay separate for now.
Cherise, just before we move on, is there any sense that the schools up in your neck of the woods, there, Green Mountain Union High School or some of the others, would be considering a return to all remote learning, at least until this most recent outbreak subsides?
Yeah, so the TRSU district actually has planned to go remote between Thanksgiving and I believe just after New Year's. So that does include Green Mountain Union High School. When you look at, the Mountain School at Win Hall, Floodbrook School, there hasn't been any indication that will happen yet. But I will say that the impacts of, teachers having children that are learning remotely has been felt here too. I know the little school didn't open until mid-October for that exact reason. So there is a big concern here for workers as well.
It's always a very difficult situation with for parents who rely on schools to be in charge of their kids for the school day. It really is going to be a struggle to get balance that with work obligations. Well, before we leave the education scene, back to you, Emma. You had a very interesting story in today's edition of the Digger on a controversy stewing in Rutland over the mascot name of the Rutland teams. What can you tell us about that? I hadn't realized that this had been percolating around for a while, but apparently there's been some discussion about this going on for a while.
Yes, this has been a pretty hot topic in Rutland lately. A group of alumni, teachers, students, faculty members came out, I think, over the summer, saying that they felt the mascot, didn't represent Native American culture appropriately. That it is tied to a racist stereotype of Native Americans. The mascot name originated when Rutland Herald writers in the 1930s compared student athletes at Rutland High School to Native Americans who were seen as violent. And now Native American groups in Vermont are saying, that is a racist stereotype that doesn't represent us and puts us into sort of a box. And this is lining up with the Vermont Principals Association statement that mascots that don't represent all students should change. So the Rutland Board of School Commissioners decided to take this on, and they voted 6-4 to change the mascot. With that said, people in the city are a bit more hesitant. They say that now might not be the time to change the mascot because there's a cost associated with it. The gym floor would have to be redesigned, the turf would have to be redesigned, the scoreboard would need to be replaced, all of the uniforms. So it could be a significant cost, and I think taxpayers are already burdened by the pandemic. With that said, those who are advocating for change say that now is the time because of the social uprising sort of movement and the movement to be more inclusive to people who are marginalized. On Monday, actually, the Rutland Board of Aldermen were debating whether or not to put a vote on the March ballot to bring this to city voters and say, okay, taxpayers, what do you think? Should we make the change? And the board ended up voting against that, and that question will not be placed on the March ballot. And that is because most of, half of the board members felt that authority should rest with the school board, and that is the legal body that decides these things. So that question won't be placed there. But those who oppose the change say that the conversation is still going to persist and that they're still going to try to do what they can to oppose this change. So it's been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I bet. And once that genie's out of the bottle, it's going to be hard to put it back into again, especially as you say, other schools and mascots, both at the high school and college level, have been, and even at the professional level, the Washington Redskins have been under new analysis as to whether or not that's no longer appropriate.
Yeah, the argument from the school board on this is that majority rule should be coupled with minority, protection of minority rights. So I think one of the really interesting pieces of this debate is, we don't have a large population of Native Americans in Vermont. And part of the reason we don't have a large population is because of the eugenics movement that took place here in the 1930s, which is around the same time that the high school took this name on. Around 250 Native Americans were forcibly sterilized in the state. So there won't be, and Allison Knott, who is the chair of the school board, made this argument that there won't be a lot of Native Americans showing up voting, in Rutland if this question were placed on the ballot, that they are a minority. And part of the reason is because of the eugenics movement, so that there is a responsibility by the school board to stand up for those rights.
Well, okay. I realize we just got through an election, and town meeting still seems like 4 or 5 months away, but we're already starting to hear about whether or not town meeting in its traditional form is going to kind of work out this year. should we still be, struggling our way through the pandemic, and vaccine has, not been widely distributed by that point? Keep on hearing different dates as to when this vaccine is going to start becoming available, but I'm assuming early March is definitely on the front end of all of that. Cherise, I recall we were talking last week about what town meeting might be like. Have you been hearing anything about whether or not the traditional floor meetings that are such an important part of the whole town meeting experience will be kind of happening as usual, or are we going to start seeing some adjustments to that?
Yeah, that hasn't really been broached too much by towns so far. I know they are approaching the budgeting season. So that's something that's been discussed more, how to logistically do that in person while cases are rising. And they're planning to do that just after the first of the year in Weston and also Londonderry, I believe. So, those questions will lead up to March, but I think it's a little hard to say what the situation will look like and if those meetings will really be feasible. For now, it's definitely, discussion of what items will come up, but the logistics, I think, will take some time to unravel a little bit.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about that's apparently bubbling up in Londonderry is the whole fiber optic question and the communication union district issue. I see Londonderry has now joined in with the Southern Vermont Communications Union District. They were in the Deerfield Valley CUD, but am I correct? Are they actually in both at this point, or
yeah,
where are they
so
at?
it's my understanding that they still are. Oh, sorry, I lost you a little bit. Yeah, they are in both, I believe. So they had initially been in the Deerfield Valley Communications Union District, which is more on the eastern side of the state, leaning into Brattleboro. The Southern Vermont CUD initially only had members from Bennington County. So while Peru and Landgrove, which are right next to Londonderry and Weston, were a member of the SVCUD, Londonderry, Weston, and a few other towns in the region were members of the Deerfield Valley CUD. And this is really coming up because both communications union districts have begun releasing their business plans and figuring out how they're going to feasibly get fiber optic to everyone in an equitable way. So obviously there's logistical challenges on the ground, such as the quality of telephone poles, as well as doing it in a fair way so that towns that are least served by fiber optic and by broadband service internet can have that opportunity first, whereas towns that have a high proportion of residents or businesses that already have access to high-speed internet, they're lower on the totem pole, so to say. Londonderry and Weston fall far below towns like Searsburg, for example, who will get targeted in the first few years of the Deerfield Valley plan. And I think that's what's really driving the membership in both CUDs is having as many opportunities on the table as possible for the town.
I know one of the other issues that's bubbling up down here is whether or not two CUDs should join forces and merge together. While the initial impetus is going to be to try and focus on those towns that are underserved, like Sandgate, Peru, Rupert, even parts of Dorset, surprisingly enough, are very underserved right now. They're finding enough customers to make a CUD at least a break-even proposition is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be something that's going to happen very quickly either. So much interest in trying to get high-speed or decent broadband service out to those underserved areas right now, with the pandemic in place and kids learning remotely from home and people working from home and all of that. But there's a real economic problem as well. It's not clear that that's going to make financial sense.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's available if you can afford it. And that's really what I think the CUDs are trying to achieve is an equitable access to high speed among everybody, so that those who don't have access to high speed because they're outpriced from it will still be able to learn and work remotely or even access, telemedicine, which are all becoming increasingly important in the context of the pandemic. So I think that you'll see a lot of towns vying for it, even if there is a high proportion of businesses or people with fiber optic and high speed access. One thing that remains to be seen too is the results of the reverse bid auction that's being held by the state right now as part of the pandemic relief program. That has the potential to attract more corporate internet service providers like Comcast or Consolidated into these areas, and construct more fiber optic, but there's not as much of a guarantee that that will be equitable and accessible to all. So that's a question that the CUDs are grappling with until that auction ends on the mid-December, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, well, more to come on that one for sure. Emma, back to you again. I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the story that you have in today's Digger about agricultural aid should be available to farmers that have been were hurt badly this summer by the drought. What can you tell us about that? What's going on there?
Absolutely. The USDA recently designated 10 counties in Vermont as natural disaster areas following the drought that occurred, the abnormally dry conditions in the drought that occurred in Vermont over the summer. So that means farmers reported to the USDA and to state officials that they had lost at least 30% of their crop. And I was told that this particularly affected the Champlain Valley, which is known for its farming. So that was fairly significant. I spoke with several farmers back earlier this summer when I was reporting on the drought, and several farmers yesterday as well when I was reporting the story, who said that they lost a whole bunch of their crop, and that it was difficult for them to access water this summer. So they are now eligible for emergency loans through the USDA, and that applies not only to the 10 counties in Vermont that were declared natural disaster areas, but also all contiguous counties. So that applies to actually every county in Vermont and counties in neighboring states as well. So farmers who are struggling can reach out to their USDA local service centers and get more information about those loans. Should be helpful to a lot of people.
Well, we'll want to follow that one for sure. In the time we have left, I thought it would be interesting for us all to kind of talk a little bit about what it's been like, sort of doing journalism during this pandemic era, and also in general. But I guess I just wondered what both of you have thought as you've covered events in Vermont over the last 8 months or so. How has it been? How do you where do you go look for stories? What is it? Has it been easier to kind of find things to write about, or has it just been much more difficult than might have been the case pre-pandemic? And Cherise, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think COVID has really impacted every sector, and journalism's not excluded from that. So, we have the same challenges in terms of technological difficulties. It definitely feels a little ironic to be covering the fiber optic issue when I have very poor internet connection myself and struggle with that during, the weekly select board meetings that I cover. But beyond that, I think in terms of finding stories, it's almost become a little bit easier. I don't know if this is a result of people being home more or, tensions being flamed, but there has been a lot of conversation in local community forums and topics that have made it really easy to pinpoint where the local discussion is happening and figure out where or what issues deserve a further look and a deeper dive. So I think that has been not necessarily a benefit because I think there maybe will be some long-term consequences of some of the community divisions that we're seeing. And those are a lot harder to project, obviously. But I think overall reporting is impacted in the way that a lot of other sectors are.
Emma, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I think like Cherise said, there's multiple facets here. I think there is no shortage of stories to report right now, which means that we're busy. I think the pandemic is a huge source of stories for us, and I think local news has become vital for folks if it wasn't already, because readers are wondering, where can I go get tested? How many people in my community have COVID-19? And then I think the social justice movement that we've seen this summer has also prompted people to pay a bit more attention to the news. And they're also wondering, what's going on in my community? Are there protests? Are there things that I should be aware of? So there is no shortage. At the same time, I began my role at Digger on June 1st, which was mid-pandemic. I've been trying to connect with sources from my apartment in Rutland, and that has its own challenges. But I'm really grateful for our tip line. I encourage folks to send me tips if you have them, because we get so many of our stories that way. But I think this is something that's been seen throughout, for journalists all over the state and all over the country. There's more stories than we know how to write. And then at the same time, I did a little reporting on the news industry in Southern Vermont and across the state. And I think, traditional weekly papers are seeing revenue shortages because of the pandemic. And yet, I spoke with Angelo Lynn at the Addison Independent, and he was saying a construction project in downtown Middlebury coupled with the pandemic has put a lot of local businesses out, and they were supporting the Addison Independent. So that's been tricky for them. At the same time, they used to publish twice a week. Now they're running 4 weekly newsletters. So they've become almost a daily operation where they were formerly twice weekly. So their production has ramped up while the revenue has been cut. So I think journalists are just trying to find ways to provide the community with the information that they need right now.
I see you nodding your head there, Cherise. I would imagine that the role of the Chester Telegraph as an online publication, that must be kind of interesting. I mean, you're able to kind of pivot very quickly, I would think.
Yeah, that is a great benefit. One interesting kind of juxtaposition here is that the Telegraph has also been putting out more stories than ever before over the last, 8 or 9 months. But it's a constant challenge to stay on top of algorithm changes when it comes to social media, which drives a lot of revenue for online papers that rely on page views. So while we've been reporting more than ever, the page views have also been going down because things have been changing on Facebook and in that landscape. So I'll put out a pitch too. If you want to follow the Telegraph online, it really helps to keep abreast with what we're doing, and getting the word out there, because it is a challenge that's been faced by, I think, a lot of online papers. I don't know if the same is true for Vermont Digger as well.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge to figure out how to incorporate your stories into the world of social media, which is how so many people get their news right now. It's challenging.
Yeah, I mean that's going to be one of the great things to kind of analyze and look at some point very shortly. The role of social media and the whole controversies that have erupted around what is truth, what is opinion, what is made up, distorted information to serve some political purpose is going to be, well, it's a fascinating one on one level, and it's also frightening on another. I mean, the world is just so different from an era when everybody got their news basically from the same 5 or 6 sources, 3 major television networks and a couple of newspapers. It's just a more splintered situation than was the case even 10 or so years ago. I guess we'll have to leave it there for now, but it's certainly an interesting topic to consider. Well, thank you both. Cherise Madigan of the Chester Telegraph, Emma Cotton of VT Digger, thank you so much for making the time to be with us today and share some of the stories you're working on and things that are going on in your respective neighborhoods. And we'll look forward to having you both back again sometime in the near future. Okay, well, great. And thanks to all of you who've been with us today. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again the next time. Have a great day.